The curved soprano. Funny little things, really, aren't they? They kind of give the impression of being a little bit like toys. But in today's video, I'm going to explain to you why they certainly are not toys. And I'm going to put a spotlight on 3 professional curved sopranos represented by 3 excellent brands in P. Moriat, Ramponi and Kazani, and Yanagisawa. We're really going to get into these guys, look at the ergonomics, the sound, look a little bit at the companies behind these 3 particular brands, and really try and understand what it is that the curved soprano is giving us. So one of the main points I want to raise in today's video is that the curved soprano is really quite a limited commodity. If you think about it the opposite way round and think of who those big brands are, when we think of Yamaha and Selmer, they don't actually offer a curved soprano, which may be surprising to many of us, really. So then it sort of limits the conversation to, well, who is making a curved soprano? And as I said at the outset, we've got these 3 brands here, and that really is about the sum of it. You know, the Ramponi and Kazani curved soprano, very famous for their sopranos, and the curved is incredible. P. Moriat, they've been making them since the outset, and then Yanagisawa, very famous for their curved sopranos as well. So then I suppose the next question is, why would we choose a curved soprano over a straight soprano? Perhaps this is the rationale behind why these manufacturers just aren't making the same number of curved sopranos that they are making straight sopranos. And the main point I want to make about the differences between the curved soprano and the straight soprano is that there is a practicality element that is huge in terms of the gain that we can get from a curved soprano versus a straight soprano. I've got 2 neck straps here, and I'll explain why a bit later. But if I just pop one of these, click one of these into place on this curved soprano here, immediately this sax is ready to go and be played. There is no physical effort on my part to play this thing now. It's very light for a start, because it's only a soprano, obviously. All I need to do is pop my thumbs into place, and it is ready to go. Were this a straight soprano, it'd be quite a different equation. I'd have a different length strap for a start. So yes, you can play without a strap on a straight soprano or with a strap, but the key point here is that we have to use a certain amount of thumb and arm strength in order to keep it in place. And that can draw a strain up the right arm after a while. So that is a whole other conversation itself, but is a big factor when we're considering those differences between the straight and the curved soprano. So that's the practicality side of things. That's a big plus for the curved soprano there. Then the other aspect to it is the sound differences, because there are sound differences. And another day I might go into the differences between the straight and the curved in more detail and do some sort of sound analysis differences between straight and curved. But I will just tell you straight off the bat right now, the fact that we have this curved section here, the sound is pushing upwards here. And because the sound effectively bounces off this bow section here and comes upwards, for me, it has more of an attacking direct sound. So that's slightly more sort of sonorous, muted, almost oboe-like sound that we get with the straight soprano. So there are direct differences. I've A-B'd it over the years, and I've always come to the same conclusion. So there are direct sound differences between the curved soprano and the straight soprano. So before talking about the bit that you all want to hear about, as always, is the sound, and quite understandable too, because that really is the heart of the matter. Let's just talk about the way the saxophone feels, the ergonomics of it and the comfort of it. So starting with the Ramponi, which is the first one you heard me playing there. The obvious thing I want to point out about just the way the saxophone instantly looks to us here, the design of it, is that this bell is quite heavily offset to the left. And there is a reason for this. If it was absolutely in line with where your thumbs are, our fingers would end up fouling these keys here, the B and the B flat key. We'll see when we move to the P Moriat, I'll talk about this in a second, the keys, the bell keys, are actually on the other side, so you don't foul those particular keys with your right fingers. So that's the way they've solved that issue. But on the Ramponi, because they don't want you to be fouling these keys, I presume this is the rationale behind it, they've severely offset the bell to the left. And that works for me. I don't mind it. It's just a little bit odd when we're playing it and we sort of see the bell so far off to the left. So here is where the sound is coming out of as we're sort of facing this way. But in terms of now how it feels under the fingers, I find it to be pretty good and natural. The table key layout is where I'd expect it to be, the pinky in relation to this third finger here. It feels good. And interestingly, by contrast, just talking about that particular aspect, on the P Moriat, even though the front keys feel pretty good, it's an immediately different feeling when we move to the table keys. There's quite a different angle here on this G-sharp key and then the other related keys here. And I found myself fouling the G-sharp key in the wrong, when I didn't expect to. Initially, having moved from the Ramponi to the P Moriat. So it just took a little bit getting used to. So to summarize, we've got quite a severe upwards angle with these table keys, and it just forced me to just adapt my thinking here in terms of how I'm going to use my left little pinky to try and operate those keys. Otherwise, on the front fingers, it felt pretty good, pretty natural, nice light key action here on the P Moriat. But just talking about the design again, here, as I just mentioned earlier, we have the bell keys on the left side, and therefore, because they're on the left side, we've got sort of a free space here for these right-hand fingers to move past the bell and not foul keys, because they're not there anymore, they're on the other side. So they can therefore bring the bell round to a more sort of central position and have more of perhaps a traditional saxophone setup in this Curved Soprano. One little thing that just got me about the System 76 in terms of ergonomics is this side F sharp key here. I find it just juts out a little bit too much. At first, I just found myself slightly fouling this key here. Again, it's that whole thing of when you adjust from one saxophone to another, this is when you sort of hit these corners and sort of come up against these issues, and then it just takes a minute or two to adjust, find out where you need to be, and actually soon you can kind of forget about those issues. So that was an interesting one for me. Moving on to Yanagisawa, I suppose in terms of ergonomics, it makes sense to talk about this last, because ergonomically, these are absolutely fantastic. For me, this sort of gets the top prize in terms of the ergonomics. It just feels so comfortable, the layout, there's no fouling of any keys that are sort of protruding, and just like I explained with the P Moriat there, everything feels perfectly designed, even to the point with this scooped and uplifted top E here. It just feels very comfortable. The palm key arrangement feels very natural, and it's that nice sort of poppy feel that you get with the Yanagisawa ergonomics, which I love. It's interesting with the bell position, as I've mentioned it on the other two, I'll mention it on this one as well. It's almost a sort of halfway house between the P Moriat and the Ramponi. It is offset to the left somewhat, to allow these fingers not to foul these low keys here. So that's the design of it that works to allow the player to not foul these keys. So that works very well, but it's just not as severe as the Ramponi. And as I say, feels great under the fingers. now getting to the heart of the matter, let's talk about the sound of these three instruments. So starting with Ramponi and Casani, in general, when I think of the R&C saxophones, I think of a sound that's layered, full of depth, full of character, full of interest, and this little curved soprano is no exception to that rule. But what actually surprised me a little bit this morning when I was testing up these three instruments before going to shoot this video was also just how much punch and kind of edge there was on top of the sound. There's almost like a sparkle, a sort of crispness to the articulation of each note on this particular instrument, an attacking sound that I didn't get so much of on the other two. But in terms of those other characteristics that I have just mentioned, it certainly has all that. You really feel like there's so much to explore in the sound. And it's also a really big sound. The dynamic scope on this instrument is huge. It really does go big. And I suppose in terms of the design of the instrument, that might have something to do with what I've just mentioned there, a big influencing factor, because it does have a very large bore, or relatively large compared to the others. All Ramponi and Casani saxophones are famous for that, having a larger bore than their counterparts. And that, at the same time, presents its challenges, because when we move to those bigger instruments, the tenors and baritones, for example, having that larger bore does mean that you need to feed more air through it. It creates more resistance. So it means that the player needs to be, adept at being able to cope with the wind pressure that's required to get the sound and all the rest of it. With the soprano, I find it less of an issue because it's a smaller instrument, but you still do notice it when you compare this to particularly the Yanagisawa in terms of the resistance. So I'll talk about that in a little bit when I move on to the Yanagisawa. But to keep things in order, let's move on to the P Moriat, talk about the sound of this little guy. So I love the sound of P Moriat saxophones, and this curved soprano is really great at showcasing that. So for me, I was getting really silky, smooth sound on this. There's a darkness in the sound of all P Moriat instruments. This one produces that nice dark sound, but it's also got that a sort of a veiled sound, a layered sound, and I love that combination. And there's a bit of a sweetness in there as well. So it's a nice little balance of elements to the sound of the P Moriat. Very attractive overall. And it does go big as well. When you push it, the sound does bloom. Not to the same degree, I don't think, as the Ramponi, which really does produce a very big, powerful sound. So that's where the differences are there in terms of that sort of peak volume between these two instruments. But overall, a really delicious sound on this P Moriat curved soprano. And then on to the Yanagisawa. It's interesting actually how different this is when you move from the P Moriat to the Yanagisawa. Instantly, I feel that the sound is very colourful. There's a lot of mids going on there. And I think that's a good general comment on Yanagisawa saxophones in general. I think this is what makes them so sort of widely appealing as saxophones, is that you get that sort of instant gratification when you play a Yanagisawa, because as soon as you blow down it, you get this sort of instant colour to the sound. They're full of the mids, which is the sound that we hear sort of straight away right in front of us. And that can be very appealing. And it's a very lovely, warm mid sound as well, very smooth, very silky. So it's funny how, I'm sure there's plenty of mids in the P Moriat sound there as well, but you really do hear the contrasting sounds. I think it's to do with those sort of the layer of depth that we get in the P Moriat and the darkness that isn't perhaps so much there in the Yanagisawa. It's a slightly brighter sound, but not a nasty bright sound at all, just a very delicious, colourful sound with, as I say, plenty of mids. So in conclusion, with the three of them, there's something to talk about with all of them. They've all got their own sound characteristics and traits that make them all unique in their own right. And I think when you guys watch this video back, you'll all have your own preferences as to the tone. And I bet you it's going to be sort of split down the three of them. Well, that's my initial guess, because I enjoy playing all three of them. I was getting different things out of all of them. They've all got their own strengths when it comes to the sound. So yeah, you tell me what you think in terms of what sounds the best. But just a final word on the Yanagisawa actually, because we've been talking about the sound, but what about the resistance? I mentioned it on the Ramponi and Kazani, a bit more resistant because it has that wider bore. So it's more standard bore with the Yanagisawa, more traditional. And you do feel that it's easier just to get around the instrument when you're really testing it, going for those upper reaches, the front F, for example, sort of whizzing up and down to that area. It just speaks a little bit more readily when you're trying to move the air through the instrument. So just less resistant, really, overall for the Yanagisawa. Again, which makes it such a widely appealing saxophone in general. Trying to summarize and conclude as to which instrument comes out on top. I think it's more a case of, again, just summarizing those differences because they all reach different players and have their pros and cons. Let's start with this guy here, the Ramponi and Kazani. One little feature I didn't mention before is the fact that it's a single piece design, which I really like. I like the fact, this is just a practical thing again, that when you put your mouthpiece on, twist it around to try and adjust it for intonation, the neck is not going to move around like we do get with any other soprano that has either a pair of necks or a detachable neck, as in these two instruments here. It's just one of those fiddly things about the curved soprano or the straight soprano that does annoy me, and I'm sure all other soprano players across the planet. But you do not have that problem with the Ramponi, so I love that. But in general, the Ramponi, for me, offers just that really interesting sound that's full of character and depth. And I think if you're just trying to go for something a bit different, if you like the rustic look of this instrument, and if that appeals to you, that sort of charm aspect of the instrument, and you're perhaps not bothered about absolute precision of ergonomics, as we will get with the Yanagisawa, then, and sound really, really does interest you, as in a really interesting sound, then this is definitely the saxophone for you. Fantastic from that point of view. Let's just skip to the Yanagisawa, because with this one here, as mentioned before, I think this instrument, the fact that it has such an instantly appealing sound and it's so free blowing, I think that this instrument would suit a broader spectrum of players because of that instant gratification element. The sound just oozes out immediately, and that is a very appealing thing. And instantly, when you pick up this saxophone, you just do not have to make adjustments with the finger. It just feels perfect. If you're used to alto and tenor and then you move on to this, you would just sort of think, wow, there's no problem here. It just feels the same, only it's scaled down. So fantastic from that point of view. And then with the P. Moriat, you know, their motto is go for the sound. And this one has an absolutely fantastic sound. Real beauty of sound here. It's a little bit more resistant than the Yanagisawa. You don't get that instant sort of middle effect that you get, as I said, with the Yanagisawa. With this one, there's a little bit more of a sophistication there, which I absolutely love. Ergonomically, it's perhaps not as smooth as the Yanagisawa, as mentioned, but it's perfectly okay. There's just a few little adjustments that you need to make. So you can see they're all offering their own strengths and weaknesses. In general, they're all fantastic instruments, and I think that we've got a nice contrasting selection of professional curved sopranos to suit all needs out there. So that's it from me. Hopefully this has been informative and useful for you guys, and I look forward to seeing you on a video soon.